All right, welcome back. We'll get into the lecture on the domestic Americas and the European discovery again of the New World. Looking at our portal here, we'll go down to domestic discovery. This will, of course, be visible. Let's post it up. Here we go. Okay. So Okay, to start, so just as transformative as the Renaissance was in Europe, quickly coming on the heels of that would be the discovery of the Western Hemisphere by um, the likes of Christopher Columbus and other Europeans. Of course, again, this was not anything to be discovered by the um, indigenous population, the Native Americans already inhabiting the Western Hemisphere for generations. But it was momentous in the fact that it would lead to staggering change, not only within Europe itself as far as imperial competition, but also for much of the rest of the world. Again, the main motives for this were commercial and economic in nature. We find, in essence, to try and find a trade route to China to break the monopoly of the Venetian merchants, as well as the Eastern Mediterranean trading classes, as they held a monopoly on all goods coming into Europe from the Orient or from China and the Eurasian continent. Western European powers were specifically interested in trying to open up alternative trade routes in order to, minimize the expense as far as the, you know, the the trade fees levied on goods coming out of the high quality goods coming out of China and elsewhere. Uh, Succeeding explorers were going to basically those coming after Christopher Columbus. Were going to begin to turn increasing amounts of attention on exploiting the wealth that was to be found within the New World itself, within the Americas, as it were. And this included things like precious metals, gold, silver, but then also just the natural resources, the raw materials that the continents held that could be harvested, shipped back to Europe to be made into the manufactured goods that were necessary. And this would hold unprecedented consequences, not only for Spain, who was really the first Western European power to, of course, begin to open up and exploit the Americas, but also for the rest of Europe as well, as more and more European powers began to realize that they needed to catch up and eclipse as quickly as possible, hopefully, the Spanish lead in seizing vast amounts of territory in the New World. Economically, of course, this is going to open up new opportunities for wealth, um, and also with it, when you begin to introduce specifically gold and silver into the economic system of Europe, this is also going to result in uh, increasing amounts, if not runaway, inflation. It was also going to necessitate the devising of new economic models, new economic philosophies. Mercantilism becomes basically um, the economic philosophy of choice among the early imperial European powers in an effort to fuse private sector interests with increasingly kind of nationalist or state interests. So there definitely was a commercial or economic side to all of this. In addition to that, however, there were going to be social and environmental consequences for the Native American population, to be sure, but it would also fundamentally alter um, the relationship between the Western Hemisphere, the inhabitants of the Western Hemisphere, and the relationships not only between cultures of the Native Americans versus the Europeans, but also that of the relationships between Europe, the African populations, namely the enslaved masses that were coming over as a result of the need for a stable pool of labor, and also Africa's relationship, the African people's relationship with the New World as well. So here we get into certain dynamics of world history as far as the interactions of these people from um, over increasingly vast distances that are nonetheless going to come into more regular contact with each other, and contact that was not going to uh, be diminished or kind of marginalized in any way. I mean, that it was the new normal in essence. There was also going to be change within Europe, not only economically speaking, as I alluded to a moment ago, but also with regard to imperial competition. Because Spain was, took the step of beginning this process of exploration to fill in, those corners of the map. Um, Very quickly, key other imperial powers of Europe, namely Portugal, France, England, and the Dutch Republic, were going to want to stake their own claims in the New World or in various unclaimed areas of the world in the Western Hemisphere and elsewhere. Uh, this was predicated on the idea of the physical acquisition and occupation of the land itself, colonialism. And so as a result, when it came to the Americas, these powers, these European powers, are going to compete with one another for the rich resources and land that the Americas um, held, for exploitation. And of course, this would serve as a new source not only of competition but also conflict as well for these European powers. And very quickly, once Spain begins to ship back copious amounts of gold and silver and other materials, and they begin to profit off of this, and they begin to amass a great deal of power as a result of it. This means that other European powers are going to either have to fall by the wayside and be eclipsed, and at the mercy of those that did exploit colonial holdings, or they were going to have to engage in their own colonial exploits, and rather quickly. And that's exactly what happened, which we'll be talking about in the coming weeks. So it's necessary here to understand the dynamics of all of that. But at the same time, in order to really fully appreciate it, we need to start by talking about the conditions and the civilizations within the Western Hemisphere on the eve of or preceding the year 1492. That's where I want to turn the bulk of the rest of this segment to focusing on. So, beginning in the North American continent, by and large, it's fair to say that there were no major real imperial powers that we can point to. This is mainly due to geography. So, as a quick kind of overview of the continent, you have dense woodland forests, usually on the eastern coast, basically in this area, kind of close to home. This meant that it was difficult to traverse the terrain. So, this was going to impede any type of extensive expanding of frontiers, or to exert any type of legitimacy or influence over a vast territory. Uh, Added to this are, the Appalachian Mountain chain, which was very difficult to traverse in a for pre-industrial societies. Um, on the other side of that ancient mountain range, however, you get into the Mississippi Valley region and the Great Plains, the heartland for much of North America. While it was easier to traverse, it was still equally difficult to maintain any type of borders or frontiers. And so, as a result, both in the eastern and central portions of North America and even the West, as we'll talk about, the geography itself did not lend itself to um, being able to be consolidated into large, formidable imperial-like um, centralized uh, governing structures. Instead, it was mostly these collections of tribal-like communities. In the West, of course, you have the Rocky Mountains. Um, Again, difficult to traverse, but also at higher altitudes, of course, difficult to survive in as well. And so, as a result, these tribes, and they numbered in the hundreds, if not more. Some examples include in the American Southwest, the Hopi, Navajo, and Apache tribes. In the Central Plains, you had the likes of the Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Pawnee, the Kiowa. In the Eastern Woodlands, you had the Cherokee, the Seminole, the Iroquois Nation, Susquehannock, and Tuscarora. And that's just a small sampling of the numerous tribes that occupied areas across North America. Some of these, of course, were agricultural. I mean, that they were fully settled and practiced agriculture. Some were nomadic and retained their kind of nomadic characteristics as far as hunting was concerned. And some were a hybrid or um, kind of of both kind of characteristics, quasi or semi agricultural, while also retaining the ability to stay on the move and be nomadic in nature. With regard to the eastern woodland Indians of North America, from a religious perspective, we're talking about a belief system that held all living things retained living spirits, which would and should be respected and honored. And that was the case carried out among a large number of tribes. Killing was only deemed or allowed as necessary. So, that every part of a hunted animal would be used, leading to great efficiency. Whether it was for consuming for food or clothing or housing. In some cases, the material to build semi-permanent structures or even permanent structures in some cases. So, as a result, um, these tribes in the eastern woodland area were, very mindful of their surroundings. Politically speaking, there were no really official political boundaries, you might say, between tribes. Oftentimes, they were quite fluid. Conflict could be rather commonplace. And given that context, it's interesting to note one exception that we know of, known as the Great League of Peace. This dated back to, well, in some records, or according to some recollections, as early as the 12th century CE. Other sources put it at some time between 1570 and 1600. So there's a good deal of discrepancy there with regard to exactly when this league was in effect. In essence, to describe it, it was a confederation of Mohawk, Oneida, Cayuga, Seneca, and Onondaga tribes, which are primarily located in what is today upstate New York. What's interesting about this Great League of Peace is that they were mostly united in their dealings with outsiders. So this was almost a kind of a collective security agreement that these specified tribes would come to the defense of each other should one be threatened. But they did not interfere with the internal operations of the independent tribes themselves. and that's why it's often described as kind of a confederation. That the tribes were retained their autonomy and their independence to a large degree. This is just simply an arrangement to come together, work together, coordinate efforts if there was a perceived um, overarching threat. Some historians see the Great League as offering inspiration for the colonial Americans' intercolonial alliance. So, in the among the English colonies, as they become more oriented towards an American identity in the decades leading up to the American Revolution, they recognize the benefits and the necessity of having colonies themselves begin to work together in common cause. Some historians point to something like the Great League of Peace as an example, a predecessor that helped to inspire that kind of coordination among the American colonies themselves. And it's fair to say that that was the case. Other historians also like to point to this Great League of Peace as an additional inspiration for the U.S. constitutional system of government that we have in place today. That this balance between in the constitutional system, the states and the federal and the centralized or federal government is very reminiscent of the tribal versus this collective security arrangement among the tribes themselves. That there's autonomy, kind of at the tribal level, would be preserved, and that there was this constant need, well, an overarching need to try and maintain some balance of power, an equilibrium between not infringing upon autonomy, in this case, tribal autonomy with the Great League of Peace, or state autonomy, and having some sort of common union to help coordinate efforts between tribes, or in the case of the Constitution, the states. Another aspect of the these North American tribes was with regard to land ownership. It's important to understand that Native American tribes did not necessarily recognize or um, abide by private property, or owning the land itself. And this would, of course, create conflict in dealing with Europeans that were intent on acquiring property and establishing colonies. The idea of private property, land ownership, was well versed and practiced, and for generations, and codified under law within the European experience. When they come into North America and they begin to transplant those ideals, this is very quickly going to serve as a point of stress, tension, and conflict between the Europeans and the Native American populations already located here. There would be efforts on the part of the Native Americans to organize themselves. Intermittently, there would be kind of calls for that up until the early 19th century in many cases. But by and large, here we see kind of a characteristic of differences that is going to, again, kind of create those tensions between different civilizations, and even how they view their surroundings and natural surroundings at that. Socially speaking, there's this greater emphasis placed on, instead of owning the land, that the Native American communities would work to adapt to nature instead of bending nature to the human will, as was more kind of a Western or European type of pursuit. Gender roles. In some cases, women of Native American tribes enjoyed elevated status, so that there was this matrilineal expression within the Native American tribes. So ancestry here was often descended through the mother instead of the father. as was more the case with Europeans. Uh, Interestingly, within the Native American tribes themselves, it was men who remained as the decision makers, but those male figures were oftentimes chosen by the women um, to serve as representatives of the clan overall. So, by kind of the matriarchs. So it's the matriarchs that are basically the kingmakers, you might say, or the those bestowers of authority to male figures within the tribe itself. When it came to leisure, you have instances of things like lacrosse, very popular sport um, in some parts of the United States even today. Again, this was a kind of a team-oriented sport, um, uh, stressing a sense of community, not individuality, which, of course, again, would conflict with European and later white American ideals. So, much like what we talked about in the last lecture with regard to something like Confucianism in the um, Chinese model and humanism arising as a result of things like the Renaissance in Europe, they're very different. They're almost diametrically opposed to one another. Well, here in the Western hemisphere, you have again a very kind of communal like association or orientation towards not only tribal structure, but also kind of with regard to the natural world itself. And so when you have these differences of opinion, differences of even how to perceive of your reality, your surroundings, um, in the case of Europeans interacting with Native Americans, it's going to lead to sources of tension. Moving into South America, we'll come back to Central America in a few moments, but moving to South America, we'll turn attention towards a very different type of organization. It's here in Central and South America that we begin to see really a more collective expressions of commercial, social, and political order. Uh, with regard to South America, that's best represented in the formation of the Incan Empire and the Incan civilization itself. Again, geographically speaking, this is an area located in today's Peru, Ecuador, and Chile. It is in the Andes Mountains, but it is also going to preside over control of the coastal plains leading to the Pacific Ocean as well. This is the youngest of the three largest civilizations, that being the Incan, Mayan, and Aztec civilizations. The Incans people would achieve prominence by about the year 1100 CE. As far as religion and mythology are concerned, it was the creator god, Via Kokra, the first term on the slide here, who sent four pairs of couples out in this part of the world to discover a land of plenty. This land of plenty would be designated by or when a golden rod would get stuck upright in the soil. That soil was then deemed to be kind of the richest soil to sow with crops and support the Incan people. The sun god Inti paired these couples together, and through their journeys, they came to occupy and settle along the site of what is today Cusco. Um, this is kind of the earliest origins, you might say, of the Incan civilization itself. By the 15th century, on the eve of first contact with the Europeans, this Incan civilization was thriving. It was an agricultural society. It mined precious metals, gold, silver, which it openly displayed in public in manners of dress, artwork, and the decoration of temples. The Incan society was a hierarchical one. Kings were seen as godlike figures, and there was a highly disciplined, structured social hierarchy. Um, there was a intricate, almost lattice work of infrastructure, namely in the construction of roads. It's running some 25,000 miles in length. And every 15 miles, there would be these kind of outposts or stations, which was roughly 15 miles was roughly the equivalent of a day's travel on foot. There were no horses in the Western Hemisphere prior to the Europeans introducing those animals. And we'll talk about that with the Columbian exchange. So there were every so often there were these stations these for lodging, for eating and housing, and so on and so forth, not only for official messengers but also for troops and any other officials. This infrastructure allowed for the ease in the flow of communication, again providing for a sense of community on an expansive in an expansive context, and to also help unite notions of identity along social, cultural, and of course political lines. When it came to governance, uh, we have the Incan state being able to levy taxes and collect taxes in what's called the mita, which was a tax in kind type of tax system. So instead of taxing and having people pay in money, instead, in a tax in kind is when you pay in resources, whether that be in grain or cattle or timber or um, other industries. It makes it easier in many cases, specifically among pre-industrial societies, in order to kind of pay a certain percentage or turn over a certain percentage of their annual yield to governing officials that they could then sell or use in order to get, get what they need as far as governing wealth or revenue. There was also the use of manual labor in order to maintain or expand things like the road network, the infrastructure itself. People could use their time and energy to as a form of tax or payment of tax, to see to the needs of the state in that regard. So these aspects were used to help equip and support public services. And again, that's pretty characteristic for pre-industrial societies. Um, so uh, I think what this gives us here is a pretty good understanding of as we what we'll do is turn attention towards the Mayan and the uh, Aztec developments and characteristics. But with regard to the North American kind of tribal system, and also the Incan people and culture here, you get a sense that there was a good deal of complexity and diversity as far as orientation along all lines of culture, politics, and so on and so forth. You know, within the Western Hemisphere itself, that there was differences according to geographic region, um, and also to experience. Uh, s- so what I'm going to do is leave things here for part one, and I will be back in part two to, like I said, continue forward with the Mayan and Aztec um, civilizations, and also first contact with Europeans.